My sister-in-law Lindsay's back in the front row this weekend. If you weren't here last weekend, you know, like Lindsay moved from a second row Christian to a front row Christian. So we're just in revival around here, and I'm just enjoying that reality. When you feel comfortable, the front row is a great place to be. But I'm excited to be with you today. We're continuing in this series we've been calling Refuel, which is really to focus our attention on how we can be filled up for the journey of life. And in particular, we're looking at how can we be spiritually refueled. I think it's pretty clear when you look at, kind of the whole context and teaching of the Scripture that God loves it when we're full. He actually wants us to be full. When we're empty, He wants to pour into us, really to overflowing. But the reality is, for most of us, really doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, wherever you're at, kind of on the faith continuum, a lot of us spend quite a bit of our life, I think, kind of running on empty. And we run on empty, I think, a lot because a lot of us don't like the idea of having to actually stop and refuel. This is true of our spirituality. It's true of a lot of areas of our life, I think. You probably drove here today. How many people drove here today? Great. You clearly had some kind of fuel in the car in order to be able to do that. Most of us, enjoy driving at some level. I don't know many people who like to stop and get gas. Okay? We like to drive. We don't like to stop and refuel, right? And do you know that gas stations know this about you? They already know that you hate going to them already. And so one of the things that they've started doing, I don't know if you've noticed, they've started turning gas stations into entertainment meccas. You know what I'm talking about? You go and you start pumping the gas, and there's a flat screen TV now. You used to just, in the old school, it was just numbers dialing around. No, not anymore. Now it's flat screen TVs. There's like waiting areas in some of these places, wine tasting, there's water parks, they've got everything. It's just a car wash, but your kids don't know, right? They're trying to sauce you into coming and enjoying yourself at their place, but it's kind of a pain to do it. You're putting in your credit card, and now you got to punch in your zip code. You got to drop off a DNA sample. It all goes through Homeland Security. See if you're on the do not fuel list or whatever. It's this arduous process. And here's what I've noticed. I think it's kind of funny. Doesn't matter how great the entertainment mecca is at the gas station. Do you notice that this is true of every gas station in America? The bathroom stinks. Am I right? I mean, they've got flat screens and wine tasting, but something's going on in the bathrooms in gas stations around. And so there's this, but they treat you like you are really doing something very, very special when you go to their bathroom because they put the key to this top secret location is attached to a canoe, right? Because they don't want you stealing the key to the stinky bathroom. Am I right? And I'm thinking, this is always faulty logic to me. It's if you're going to attach it to something, try an air freshener instead of the canoe. Anyway, that's just me. But refueling is not always easy, is it? It's not our favorite thing to do, and it can be a real drag, especially if what you're doing is connecting to the wrong refueling source. And this is a huge reality in our spiritual life. And so if you're here today and you would love the idea of having a close relationship with God, you would get into the idea of having a vibrant, growing connection with the God of all the universe, that sounds like a good idea. You probably want to have a tip from Him or two on how can I actually be refueled in that way? What does that look like? I want the freedom and the fullness of what it looks like to be connected to Jesus. How do I refuel? You and I need to learn how to do that. That's what this series is really all about. But the goal of the series, and I'm trying to draw some contrasts to some maybe kind of early teaching that I got in my personal faith that was oriented a ton around doing more stuff, like spiritual stuff. We've talked about a few of these things over the course of this series. But what happens is when our focus starts being on, I got to do kind of religious stuff, spiritual stuff. And you might have your own list. I've got mine of what that might be. You might have inherited that from a grandma or from a parent or from somebody you saw on TV or whatever. what ends up happening is a lot of times those rituals or those things that we do end up really becoming something that produce a sense of failure and discouragement if you can't deliver on them all the time. And this church, at least, is filled with a lot of people that are not so perfect. Look up and down your row. I'll prove the point, right? Like, we might try, but when it's all about the doing, it actually produces things maybe that produce guilt and failure. My goal is to move us not toward doing more stuff, but more really toward a feeling of desire simply to be with Jesus, simply to be connected to Him. And so we begin today with our theme passage of Scripture. We've looked at this a couple of different times. It's in Ephesians chapter 3. It'll be up on the screens, and it says this. Paul writes, "How deeply intimate and far-reaching is God's love. How enduring and inclusive it is. Endless love beyond measurement that transcends our understanding." It goes beyond anything you can wrap your head around. He says, "This extravagant love pours into you until you are filled to overflowing with the fullness of God." You and I can be filled, we can be refueled like to overflowing in our lives. And I want to kind of illustrate this point with you today with a story that kind of comes out of my everyday life, okay? I'm just going to get like real with you today. Is that cool? Many of you know that my wife Jen and I have 4 kids, amazing kids. Love them, awesome. And each one of them has a real passion for water bottles. Am I right? I mean, this is a thing in my house. In particular, they're all about the Hydro Flask. Anybody got a Hydro Flask? I'm about to school some folks on some genuine goodness here in just a second. If you haven't seen these things, you don't know what I'm talking about. It's basically a water bottle that keeps things really cold. I mean, like 32 degrees cold for like 17 years. I don't know what it is about the science of these things, but it's amazing what these things do. And so every morning with my 4 kids, with the ice and with the water and with the fighting over who took my sippy lid and all, the straws and all the other stuff. And so I thought to myself, I got to get on the action. This sounds like something worth fighting over. So I'm going to buy myself a Hydro Flask. And so I had a Hydro Flask because I like the idea of my drink being 32 degrees for 17 years. And so I bought one of these things. But then I had like my own bright idea, my own creativity that I'm bringing to the Hydro Flask party. And it was basically this. Personally, I like sparkling water. Okay? For me, it's better than regular water. Regular water is good. Sparkly water is sparkly. It's better. Okay? And so I got one of these Hydro Flasks and I filled it up. My very first time I filled it up with sparkling water. No problem. That is to say, there was no problem until I decided to take a drink of it a little bit later this morning. And some of you might know where this is going, but I got thirsty. I flipped open the straw lid, and because all the carbonation had built up so much on the inside, I promptly shot myself in the face with 32-degree water. And so it was this fountain, okay? That's Hydro Flask refreshing. Now, here's the thing about me. I'm kind of slow on the uptake. I didn't just do this once. I literally did this about 5 times throughout the day because it just kept sort of effervescing, okay? The contents of the water bottle, the contents of the Hydro Flask actually ensured that there was going to be an overflowing onto me. Now, I tell you that story because I kind of want you to get this picture of what it looks like to be refreshed and refueled and renewed all day long in a relationship with God. A refreshing that can't be contained. A refreshing that overflows, a renewal of heart, you can't tamp it down. It just keeps occurring. Now, the problem is that for a lot of us, we like the idea of that kind of vitality. Who wouldn't? We want that in our life, but sadly, we walk around empty quite a bit. We open up the spout of the Hydro Flask of our heart, and nothing comes out. Not only does it not come out and you're all over you, you turn it upside down, there's just nothing inside. And it's actually a direct result of what we're putting into the container or what we're not putting in. And so for many of us, like us, especially those that maybe have a relationship with God, if you've been around church at all, you've dabbled in things of faith or checked out another church or been around a bit, we try different things to try to put into our Hydro Flask. We shove certain things in there. We talked about a few of these things in earlier weeks. We cram the get up an hour early in the morning to be with God thing into our Hydro Flask. Anybody ever done that one? Like cram that one in there. I've done that one a bunch of times. Because all good Christians wake up at 3 a.m. to spend time with God because God's impressed by things like that, right? And when I was in Sunday school, we sang songs like "Rise and Shine and Give God the..." Okay, some of you just outed yourself and your Sunday school experience. God bless you. You give God the glory at 3 a.m., okay? Because good Christians wake up peppy. That's what we do. We're like God cheerleaders first thing in the morning. And again, can I just be honest? It doesn't work for me. I'm not peppy in the morning. I'm not peppy ever, right? Why? When I don't speak English in the morning. I wake up speaking Chewbacca most days, okay? Like some people wake up, it's like, good morning, God, and I'm like, oh God, it's morning. Like that's me. It just didn't work for me. But I've tried to do other stuff. I've tried to read through the whole Bible in a year into my Hydro Flask. Anybody ever tried this one? Okay, and this is one of those kind of things. There's nothing wrong with doing that, by the way. I'm all for it, but I've tried this one and been successful, and then I've tried this one and I've failed. Like by January 9th of my New Year's resolution, and I'm already screwed. Okay, there's like apps and stuff that you can download to help you in your reading and all that kind of stuff, and I think that that's absolutely great. Nothing wrong with reading through the Bible in a year. But here's the thing. I've tried this from a place of real like desire to be with God, and then I've also tried this from a place of kind of like obligation. Well, it's like I should do it. So like, okay, so here I go. And I take the deep breath and I jump in. And I'm usually fine. When I do that, I'm usually fine in January. Maybe, can anyone relate to like starting out? Like I start out on a good foot. January, I'm fine. You miss a day or two, you can kind of catch up. If you've never gone through read the Bible in a year plan, it's basically like you read 3 or 4 chapters a day, okay? And then you just kind of go along. And that's fine on day 1, day 2, day 3. You miss a couple of days and you're waking up to Thursday morning, I've got 47 chapters I got to read today, okay? And that's kind of what ends up happening. And so I'm usually fine. First week or so, I get through Genesis, maybe Exodus. But long about Leviticus, the wheels start coming off the wagon. Once I hit about the 4th animal sacrifice on the 5th hill with the 8th high priest or whatever, I'm like, I'm a vegetarian. I just can't even do it anymore. And all that. And I start feeling like a failure. You ever felt like that? You're normal. Okay? And we start feeling like that because we think, well, if I was a better Christian, I'd be a better reader or whatever. And we do these things to ourselves. I do stuff. I've tried a ritual or two. Have you? Just shoving it into the Hydro Flask, hoping that it's going to effervesce, and it never actually provides that. And it's because, as I said in week number 3, if you missed it, you can go back and check the podcast, but in week number 3, I said that passionless rituals lead to spiritual emptiness. Just because it's a ritual doesn't mean it's going to produce anything that's going to overflow. In fact, passionless ritual that's done not from a place of desire, but from a place of obligation, actually produces emptiness. In fact, we said that spiritual fullness is not a demand to do more. It's an invitation to be with. Let me say that again. Spiritual fullness is not a demand that you do more. It's actually an invitation that you would be with. I was rereading some of the Gospels this past week, and something really jumped out at me that it was kind of a fresh thing. I'd never really struck me in this way before. Books like Matthew and Mark and Luke and John are these great repositories of Jesus' interactions with people. All kinds of conversations and moments of healing and stuff like that. And I was struck by something that I would never struck by before, and it was this. It was the brevity with which Jesus commonly connected with people. Brief little installments of connection that Jesus did all the time. Short little encounters in the daily. And when these short little encounters happened, people walked away from those short little moments totally transformed. Jesus would touch someone, or he would heal someone, or he would speak a word of encouragement to someone. And this brief little encounter would change everything from that moment on. And it kind of got me thinking, I could give you like countless examples of this. In Matthew 8, he comes across a man who was a broken person. He says, "Would you like to be healed?" And the guy says, "Yeah." And Jesus just says, "Be healed." And the guy literally walked up fully transformed and went on with his day. Brief little encounter. Jesus touches the hand of Peter's mother-in-law, and she's healed. Just a touch. In Matthew chapter 9, a sick woman reaches out for Jesus in the busy crowd and just touches the hem of his robe. And he looks and identifies who she is. And in just 9 words, Jesus changes everything. He said this to her, "Daughter, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well." 9 words. "Daughter, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well." Jesus was always walking into situations with brief but powerful words like, "It's all right, I'm here. Don't be afraid." Now, what's my point? My point is that God, through the pages of the Scripture, to me, seems to go to quite a bit of effort to show us that He loves to interact with people in simple, everyday, kind of meeting us at the point of our need kind of interactions that remind us of His love and leave us transformed in the aftermath of it. He wants to remind you and me of His love in the everydayness and leave us totally transformed, short and transformative. And it really kind of challenged the ritualistic way that I sometimes think about spiritual refueling, and maybe it will for you too. It kind of got me thinking this question. If you're taking notes, jot down this really fast. What if instead of making time for God, I simply became more aware of His love all the time? What if instead of making time for God, cramming Him into my busy schedule somewhere, getting a slot for God, I simply became more aware of His love all the time? If you've ever tried to pencil in the moment, the inviolate time in your crazy schedule, and then been frustrated because crazy just gets crazy, that's kind of the idea of a crazy schedule. What if it wasn't about just slotting time in my calendar for God in a window, but I became more aware of His love all the time? I just had some short, powerful, insightful, kind of meeting me right at the point of my need and where I'm at right there in that moment, kind of interactions with my friend. I just become more aware of His love, become more aware of His presence right there in the midst of what I'm doing. Doesn't that sound good? It's what the ancient scholar and teacher in the 1600s, his name was Brother Lawrence, called practicing the presence of God. Practicing the presence of God. And so this is the challenge that I want to bring to you today. There's just a few things I'd like you to consider, maybe to ponder. Here's the first one. Number 1, stop thinking so big. Stop thinking so big. Instead of thinking we have to have all these like grand behaviors, like I'm going to read the Bible cover to cover, I'm going to start an NGO to eradicate, and some dreaded African disease, I'm going to go on a long fast or whatever. And by the way, if you do any of these things and they're driven out of a genuine sense of desire, awesome. Great. Do it. Go for it. But if it's done to try to earn our way into God's good graces, if it's done in such a way that all the grand stuff is all the stuff I'm supposed to do, it's out of obligation, then I want to encourage you to stop thinking so big. Because practicing the presence of God doesn't require doing big. In fact, practicing the presence of God often starts very small. Jesus said in Luke chapter 16, verse 10, He said, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with a lot." Starts little. In Matthew 17:20, He said, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, it is enough." In Matthew 10:42, he said, give a cool cup of water to someone who's thirsty, for instance. Look at this. The smallest act of giving or receiving makes you a true apprentice. It's okay to stop thinking so big as if that's somehow more significant or more healthy. Powerful transformation happens in the smallest of acts. So in a spiritual sense, stop thinking that your refueling needs to be a Thanksgiving banquet every time you go get filled up. Did you know that studies show that actually healthy nutrition is done a lot stronger and a lot healthier in your life if you eat 6 small meals, not one gigantic Thanksgiving feast every day? It's true. Spiritually full people nibble their way into fullness. Let me say it again. Spiritually full people nibble their way into fullness. Here's number 2. Start enjoying small connections with God. Start enjoying small connections with God. When what you need is fullness, all you need is a small connection with a big God. He only needs a moment to fill you up. When you're as big as him and you're as little as you, he doesn't need a lot of time. He just needs a moment. That's great news for you. Now, I'm not saying that we should have small dreams or that we should aspire to have a tiny impact. Here's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that big dreams, big faith is actually built on small connections with God. Okay? I'm not saying like lower the horizons, man. Like don't dream big. Don't have like lofty desires to change, make an impact in the world and all these things. That's awesome. I'm saying that those things are predicated. They're founded upon the small little connections with God. All you really need is a small connection with a big God. In Mark chapter 1, the story is told of a man with leprosy who came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. Here's what the guy said to Jesus. He said, if you're willing, you can heal me and make me clean, he said. In verse 41, it says, moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. I am willing, he said, be healed. And instantly, the leprosy disappeared and the man was healed. I am willing, be healed. 5 words. And the guy's life is absolutely transformed. Jesus doesn't need a 15-course Thanksgiving meal to fill you up. He can do it with 5 words. He did it with a touch. This is awesome news for us, you guys. Do you see how this isn't built upon all of your doing? It's not built on some ritual that we enter into. It's built on just like, hey, Jesus, are you willing? The answer is yes, I am. Be healed. It's really, really cool. Huge faith, abundant life, enormous purpose, gigantic dreams are built on the foundation of little, daily, moment-by-moment, living and breathing connections. Small, little connections that help us to practice the presence of God. What would happen this week if you started enjoying some small connections with God in your daily life? Well, here's what I want to encourage you with this week. It's number 3. Look for triggers that remind you of God's presence. Look for triggers that remind you of God's presence. My wife was out of town several days this week. She was busy at a work conference out of town, and I was busy here at home. But we had this cool little connection that you've probably had a bunch of times this past week. We stayed connected by text. How many people received a text from someone this week? Okay, 90% of y'all are liars. Because if I were to ask you to produce your AT&T or your Verizon bill, we all know how many texts you got, okay? We do it. Half of you did it while you were driving. Oh, yes, that happened. But we were each kind of doing our own thing. We're distant from, thousands of miles separated from one another. That was happening all throughout the week. When one of us would invade the other's busy moment with just a little text reminder that we were there. And I'd read you some of her texts, but this is a family show. Okay? But they were hot. No, I'm just kidding. But here's my point. It's just a little trigger. Just a little reminder. It wasn't a 45-minute phone call. Just a little check-in. What I want you to look for this week are the triggers that remind you of God's presence in your life. Little triggers. I'll show you what I mean. My little brother went away to college many, many years ago. And as it is true for many families, I think, especially for my parents, a pretty significant moment. The youngest goes away to college. Now we're empty nesting, all these other things, and that was true for them. And they both committed to pray for him while he was going to be away at his first year of college. I'm going to pray for you every day. Now, I don't know if you've ever made a commitment. I'm going to pray for you, I'll pray for you every day for a year. Then that's like, oh boy. Because I'm like, January 9th, I'm in Leviticus, dang it, right? But they made us, hey, we're going to pray every single day. Well, my dad does something every single night of his life that, ironically, I do now every single night of my life. And basically what he does is as he's getting ready for bed, he takes all of the contents of his pockets and he takes it and sets it out on his nightstand so it's ready for the next day. So you, literally every day of his life, you look at his nightstand. If you caught him sleeping, and you would see his watch, you would see some pocket change and maybe some gum, his keys, all of that stuff. Always a pocket knife, by the way, every day of his life, pocket knife. And that's how he would do it so that he was ready for the next day. But there was this one night in particular where his regular sort of menagerie of stuff had a new participant. There was a new enrollee in the contents of his pockets. And it looked like this. If you don't know what this is a buckeye. A buckeye. It's kind of like a chestnut, unless you went to Ohio State, okay? It's a buckeye. And so now one of these buckeyes is among all of his stuff on his nightstand, along with his pocket knife and his watch and all that kind of stuff. There's one solitary buckeye. Kind of odd. It's like walking around with an acorn in your pocket. It's like, what's up with that? And so I actually asked him, I said, what's that in your pocket? And he said this. He's like, that's my reminder to pray for your brother. And I said, what do you mean? I didn't even know what it is. He's like, that's a buckeye. I'm getting a little Wikipedia update from my dad on how to look at stuff, what nuts look like, okay? It's like, that's my reminder to pray for your brother. Every time I put my hands in my pockets and I feel that little buckeye in my pocket, I'm reminded to just fire up a quick prayer for Simeon. I'm like, really? And he kept that buckeye in his pocket for the entirety of my brother's freshman year. And I remember looking at that, finding that buckeye later on his dresser in the spring. He'd literally just about worn the hull of that nut completely off over the course of that year, but there it sat, just a reminder to him, God's presence in my life and my decision to pray. What triggers you to remember the goodness of God, to remember God's presence in your life? What triggers you to become more aware of God's presence in the everydayness of your life? Now, this might strike you as a little bit odd, but I've got a few. Rainbows trigger me. I'll tell you why. Because from the earliest moments of my life that I can remember, every time I see a rainbow, literally, I remember the old story of Noah and God's promise by that rainbow to never flood the earth in judgment ever again. That rainbow as a billboard reminder that God still keeps his promises. They're still at work in the world right now. A rainbow does that for me. God knew that Noah would require a reminder of his promise. And not just Noah, that generations after that, we'd need reminders of that. So he gave him a trigger. You know why he gave him that? Because we have a great tendency to forget all the time. We forget great. We have a harder time remembering, so God gave him a very practical reminder. It's like smack in the middle of the sky. You can't miss it. There it is. And God has done this a lot of different ways throughout history. When you read the scripture, you'll see all kinds of little triggers of reminders that God has given to his people to say, you know what, I'm here. For Abraham, it was the physical mark of circumcision that literally set him and his entire people line apart. It was basically God's way of saying, hey, remember, you're my people. You're special. I've got big plans and big promises for you. And it was this reminder. It was this trigger. Now, if I were Abraham, I might not love that trigger. I'm thinking to myself, you gave Noah a rainbow. Like, what's up, right? But we need the reminder. There are so many examples of God giving us those kinds of reminders. Rainbows, the Old Testament altar. He's like, build an altar, stack up some stones. Remember what I did right here. You need to be triggered. Even the act of communion itself. We celebrate communion around here together, where we take the bread, we take the cup. You know that those are physical triggers to remind us. In fact, Jesus said, do this, take this. This is my body. This is my blood. Do this to remember. What triggers you to remember the sacrifice? What triggers you to remember the graciousness of God? Not some far-off place, not even in some window of time that you carve out of your busy schedule. I mean just like on the daily. Where can you put a Buckeye in your pocket? Where are the little things, the simple little things that could trigger you this week? I thought of just a couple like random ones. What if this week when you go and you're watering your houseplants, let's say, you just decide, you know what, I'm going to make this a trigger for me just to remind myself that God has extended a living water to me and I will never be thirsty again. I'm just watering my plants. It's just triggering me. Or how about a really common one that most of you do every day, some of you should do every day, and that's take a shower. And that as the water pours over you, to just be reminded, you know what? My heart has been sprinkled with the forgiveness of God. It can't go away. It is a gift that he has given to me to wash me absolutely clean. Thank you, God. Do you see how common and everyday it can be? I don't know what it might look like for you, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It's as simple as a Buckeye in your pocket. But it is a reminder of God's presence. It's a reminder of his love. It's a reminder of his goodness. It's a reminder of his purposes that are already at work in you. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11. God says, this command I'm giving you today is not too difficult for you. It's not beyond your reach. It's not kept up in heaven, so distant that you must ask, who will go up to heaven and bring it down so we can hear it and obey? It's not kept beyond the sea, so far away that you must ask, who will cross the sea and bring it to us so we can hear it and obey? It's not that complicated. He says, no, the message is very close at hand. It's on your lips and in your heart so that you can obey it. It's close at hand. Sometimes we need a rainbow reminder. Sometimes we need the simplest little thing to remind us of God's presence and God's nearness to our life. What could trigger you this week? I've carried a trigger in my pocket, looks like this, for the past 6.5 years. It's a little stainless steel metal disc. It's cut in a circle. You probably can't see it from where you're sitting, but it has carved in it the Center Church logo. Okay? I've carried it in my pocket, literally with me, every day for the last 6.5 years. This little disc was given to every single launch team member of Center Church when we began in the backyard in South Park 6.5 years ago. There's probably only about 20 of these out there. And every time I see it, as I keep it with me, I'm triggered. I'm triggered to remember that God has a plan for us. I'm triggered. Now, I don't always know what the plan is. Does that make me a bad leader? No, it makes me a dependent leader. It's a big difference. But every time I grab it, I fire up just a simple little prayer. And it's a prayer that has modified and changed over the course of 6.5 years for us as a people. But I'll paraphrase for you. The spirit of what I speak out on a regular basis is basically, God, have your way at Center Church. See, it's not the big stuff so much. It's not the read the Bible from cover to cover in a year stuff. It's not the pray all night. It's not the fast for 40 days. Not necessarily. Can I encourage you? Thinking bigger is not always better. To just start enjoying the small little connections with God. Because when God makes a small connection with you, it's more than you can contain. When he decides to pour into your hydro flask, every time you open it, it is a fountain of blessing that overflows from the inside out. We just need to start looking for little triggers to remind us of his ongoing goodness each day. Because here's what I want you to catch. There's an invitation that is presented to you and me. We all come factory installed with some empty hydro flasks. And there's an invitation that Jesus is wanting to give to you, saying, I will come and I will fill you up from the inside out. I'll pour in a water that will overflow in you. You'll never be thirsty again. That they can even try to suppress it in you. It won't work. It's going to overflow and pour out and refresh and renew you all the time. Because of what Jesus has already offered to put into your hydro flask, the Spirit of God, through faith in Jesus, it has the power to erupt and to overflow in a goodness that can't be contained. That spiritual fullness that you're looking for, it's not an obligation to do more. It's an invitation. Just come and be with. And I close with Romans 8, verse 11. Look at this. Paul writes, the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. He is what is in your hydro flask now if you want it. And he says, and just as God raised Christ Jesus from the dead, he will give life to your mortal bodies by the same Spirit living within you.